This week, in wrestling history, 116 years ago this week, we're taking it so far back I can feel the hair on my head touching my ass. At least I think that's my hair. On May 19th, 1905, it was just a few weeks ago I mentioned George Hackenschmidt beating Tom Jenkins in Madison Square Garden to become the first man recognized as the world champion in wrestling. Well, Frank Gotch was at the show that night challenging both men, but he said that he would wrestle Jenkins regardless, win or lose. Jenkins was the American champion at the time, and he agreed to put his title on the line against Gotch on this date at MSG in a match that lasted a ridiculous 2 hours and 15 minutes. Altogether, Gotch and Jenkins wrestled a series of 9 matches together, and this was match number 6. According to a great write-up by Steve Yohe at Wrestling Classics, the match did not begin until 10:30 that night. And things got nasty between the two men. Jenkins put Gotch in a stranglehold that the referee, who was also a baseball umpire, did not realize for several minutes was an illegal hold. And after he broke it, Jenkins simply reapplied another one. He reapplied the move again. Gotch protested to the referee a few times, stalling the match. He allegedly bit Jenkins on the arm at one point. It got nasty between these two. One reporter said by the end of the first fall, 1 hour and 27 minutes into the match, it looked like Gotch had basically gassed out. Looks like he had basically tired himself out so much he could barely do anything. The second fall started at 12:04 in the morning. Late in the fall, both men took a nasty spill out to the floor. And Gotch won the second fall in 36 minutes to tie things up at 1 apiece. And in the third fall, Jenkins pinned Gotch in 11 minutes with a full Nelson. Gotch's people argued that the city of New York and the appointed referee had ripped him off. It was the New York City screwjob, I guess. They had their 7th match 1 year later on May 23rd, 1906 in Kansas City, this time with Gotch winning the title 2 falls to 1. With Jenkins taking the first fall in 26 minutes, Gotch winning the second fall in 14 minutes, and the third fall in 17 minutes. After, Jenkins gave a speech telling the crowd of 6,500 that he lost fairly and that Gotch would be the champion for a very long time. A long time turned out to be 7 months. And when Gotch died years later, he was only 39 years old. Jenkins lived to a ripe old age of 84. 58 years ago this week, on May 17th, 1963, Bruno Sammartino won his first WWE Championship, defeating Buddy Rogers in just 48 seconds at Madison Square Garden, kicking off what would become, and still is to this day, the longest title run for any champion in company history. Over 7 years, 2,803 days. Fabulous Moolah was women's champion for longer, but much of that came before there was even a women's title in WWE. Rogers claimed that 6 weeks before the match, he suffered a heart attack and he was in the hospital even as late as 5 days before the match. But by golly, he wanted to be a man of his word and make sure he dropped that title. Bruno had a very different take and said the heart attack story was concocted by Rogers to make himself look better, as he was not very happy about losing. He said the commission doctors ran all kinds of tests on Buddy, but could not find anything wrong outside of him complaining about chest pain. And for the record, there are match results for shows as little as 2 weeks before this MSG match that list Buddy Rogers as wrestling. So the idea that he was in the hospital for 6 weeks and only crawled out of his hospital bed a few days before to do this match, a little suspect. Bruno admitted that he did tell Rogers, as legend has it, in so many words, once they got to the ring that night, we can do this the easy way, or we could do this the hard way. 48 seconds later, Buddy Rogers chose the easy way. 31 years ago this week, on May 19th, 1990, Robocop rescued Sting at WCW's Capital Combat pay-per-view, dubbed The Return of Robocop, as part of a promotion for the release of Robocop 2. Oh, God. Sting was injured, but they advertised him for the pay-per-view anyway. So he gets jumped by the Horsemen, locked in a shark cage so that Robocop can ripped the door off the hinges to free him. And the Horsemen had to back away from Robocop out of fear, so watching Arn Anderson and Sid back away from Robocop is quite the sight. Also on the show, Mean Mark beat Johnny Ace in Ace's final televised match in the United States. With All Japan cutting its ties with the NWA, he chose to keep working in Japan until he retired. And by the end of that year, Mean Mark had found work as an undertaker for Vince McMahon. 29 years ago this week, on May 17th, 1992, one of the greatest matches in WCW history took place. This made my list of the top 15 matches in WCW history. Sting's Squadron. Sting, Barry Windham, Ricky Steamboat, Nikita Koloff, and Dustin Rhodes defeated the Dangerous Alliance, Rick Rude, Arn Anderson, Stunning Steve Austin, Larry Zbyszko, and Bobby Eaton in a War Games match at Wrestle War 92 from Jacksonville, Florida. This is probably the greatest War Games match that I have ever seen. It included 7 WWE Hall of Famers, including Medusa, who was outside the cage with Paul Heyman. The Dangerous Alliance did not last as long as they should have. They were feuding with Sting at the time. He was the world champion. Nikita Koloff entered last for Sting's Squadron. They played up whether or not he could be trusted. Sting was down in the corner, and Nikita reached down to pull him up. Sting looked skeptical. As they were talking, Anderson and Zbyszko went to attack Sting from behind, and Nikita shoved Sting out of the way. He took the bullet for him. Neither Jim Ross nor Jesse Ventura on commentary brought up the fact that it was exactly 1 year ago before this that Sting and Lex Luger wrestled the Steiner brothers at the first ever Super Brawl. In that match, Nikita Koloff ran down with a chain that was intended for Luger. But Sting shoved Luger out of the way and Koloff hit Sting with it instead, which cost them the match. So here, they basically repeated the spot, but it was Koloff saving Sting. So a nice little bit of continuity there, except that Ventura couldn't understand why Sting and Koloff were teasing some kind of beef. They're partners, aren't they? That's what he said. And JR never pointed any of that out to him. You know, if he wasn't there for it, which I don't think Ventura was. Jim Ross could have pointed it out to him, and he never did. But this match is well worth going out of your way to see if you've never seen it before. And if you have, watch it again. It's great. 28 years ago this week, on May 17th, 1993, one of the more famous episodes of Monday Night Raw aired live from the Manhattan Center with 2 memorable moments. First, the Kid, who they had also referred to on television as the Lightning Kid, and I believe the Kamikaze Kid, pinned Razor Ramon in the biggest upset in WWE history. It is the match that made Sean Waltman a star on the national stage and gave birth to the 1-2-3 Kid. He had a tryout match. He never thought he would actually get hired because at that time, how many people were WWE hiring that looked like Sean Waltman? Not many. They'd bring in guys like him to do jobs for, $300, but that's about it. So he never thought he would actually get hired. He gets a call one day from Vince McMahon, I think Pat Patterson was on the line with him, and he runs this entire scenario by him because we're going to bring you in for a few weeks to do jobs, but we're not bringing you in to do jobs. We just want people to think that you're on television to do jobs, but then we're going to give you this big shock win on television over Razor Ramon. So he worked job matches against Doink and Mr. Hughes for a few weeks. Neither of those guys were aware of the plans, so they treated him like they would any other job guy at the time, which only made it that much more shocking when he eventually won. But Vince and Pat laid everything out, even right down to the rematch they would have with Razor putting $10,000 of his own money on the line if the Kid would accept his challenge. He told them that, he told the company that he had a tour of Japan. And they said, well, no problem. We'll just have, we'll have Razor cut promos on television each week, upping the dollar amount until you finally accept. And then you'll come back and we'll do the match. And that's exactly what they did. But the main reason they were doing this, it wasn't really because they had big plans for Sean Waltman. it was to begin the Razor Ramon babyface turn. And Waltman says the same thing. That's really why they came up with this idea. Now, if they can make a new guy in the process, even better. But that's really why this was done. It was more for Razor than anything else, to give Ted DiBiase a reason to start making fun of him on TV. Later in the show, Marty Jannetty returned out of the crowd in a disguise to confront Shawn Michaels in the ring and accept his open challenge to a match for the Intercontinental title. Jannetty had last wrestled Michaels for the title at the Royal Rumble, and he was fired immediately after, allegedly for being under the influence of alcohol or drugs or both during their match. Jannetty has claimed that he was just really tired, and he blamed Shawn Michaels for starting that rumor. But here he was back, and Mr. Perfect walked out during the match to get a closer look. He ended up throwing a towel in Shawn's face, which caused him to stumble backwards into a small package, or some kind of roll-up, and Jannetty won the title, which he would not hold on to for very long. The following month, he dropped it at a live event to Michaels, who had some help from his new bodyguard who debuted that night, his insurance policy by the name of Diesel. So you can say with Michaels losing to Marty, Kid beating Razor, and then Diesel debuting a few weeks later, this was a big period here for the Kliq. Speaking of the Kliq, 25 years ago this week, on May 19th, 1996, the night of the infamous curtain call incident at Madison Square Garden, which was captured on film by two fans who snuck a video camera into the building, like they always used to do whenever they would go to the shows back then, Jason Cosmides and Manny Matati. Were it not for them breaking the law, that incident never would have seen the light of day. It was the final WWE appearances that night for Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. Their last appearances with the company for the next 6 years. Both of them were headed for WCW. Fans in the building that night, a lot of them, they knew that it was their final night. They were serenaded by alternating chants of "You sold out" and "Please don't go." Triple H, back in his Hunter Hearst Helmsley days, pinned Razor Ramon. Goldust was still out with a knee injury, so Helmsley was the substitute for him. Hall grabbed the microphone, the house mic, after the match, and WWE officials in the back panicked, and they cut the mic, not knowing what he was going to say, which was just, "Say goodbye to the bad guy." And in the main event, Shawn Michaels beat Diesel in a steel cage to retain the WWE title. After the match, Michaels kissed Diesel, who suddenly sprung to life, as if Michaels was breathing oxygen into his lungs. And the two of them hugged in the ring, which was a no-no back then. You did not do that in front of the live audience. You didn't embrace your opponent like that publicly after just wrestling them, one being a heel, the other being a babyface. I mean, it seems kind of silly now because wrestling is silly. I mean, wrestling these days is treated like a joke. It's like a Broadway show. But back then, that was a no-no. They were then joined in the ring by Razor and Helmsley. All four men embraced. I think the Kid was, I don't know if he was out hurt or he was on a tour of Europe, but he wasn't there. A lot of people in the back were less than amused by this entire thing. Among them, Vince McMahon, Bruce Pritchard, Jerry Briscoe, Jim Cornette, and Davey Boy Smith. Bret Hart, who was not there that night, but obviously he found out about what happened. He was not happy. Shawn Michaels claimed that he asked Vince McMahon about it beforehand, but things just got out of hand. And the axe had to fall on somebody to make a point. They couldn't touch Hall and Nash because they were leaving. Shawn was the champion, so it all fell on Helmsley, who admits that he was going to win the King of the Ring tournament the following month. And instead, he jobbed out to Jake Roberts in a qualifying match, and the crown went to Stone Cold Steve Austin, who cut his famous Austin 316 promo that night, which made him and the company a lot of merch money. Highest selling t-shirt of all time, I think, wrestling-wise. But I do think the impact of this on his career, Austin's that is a little bit overrated. Austin would have been fine had he not won King of the Ring. It's one of those what-if questions I've gotten a few times over the years as like a mailbag question. What if? What if Triple H had won King of the Ring? What if Austin didn't win King of the Ring in 96? And sometimes people forget, it was not the King of the Ring that made him a megastar. He didn't even make the main card at SummerSlam that year. He wrestled Yokozuna on the pre-show. It was his rivalry with Bret Hart. Him calling out Bret in the fall, Bret coming back to the company, them facing off at Survivor Series. And then feuding into the beginning of 97 all the way through WrestleMania and even beyond WrestleMania. Those matches, that feud, is what put Austin on the map and got him acceptance as a main event star. And if it wasn't Austin 316, it would have been some other catchphrase, but, he still would have been champion and he still would have ended up as the top babyface in the company. He just may have ended up with a less cool catchphrase. Vince McMahon told Triple H if it was anybody else, he would have fired them. But he wasn't going to do that. He said he was going to start him back at the bottom. He told him, you're going to have to learn to eat shit and like the taste of it. You're going to have to eat plates and plates of shit. And he did. For many months, he did jobs on TV. He did jobs on pay-per-view. He didn't win a pay-per-view match until the following year. Although he did win the Intercontinental title in October. And it gets lost in the noise of the curtain call that night, but there was also a title change on this show. The Godwins beat the Body Donnas to win the Tag Team Championship. 22 years ago this week, on May 23rd, 1999, Owen Hart fell to his death from the ceiling of Kemper Arena in Kansas City at the WWE Over the Edge pay-per-view. As far as wrestling tragedies go, you've got the Benoit tragedy where 3 people senselessly lost their lives in brutal fashion. And you have Owen Hart, and it doesn't get any worse than that. The Owen thing will stay with me for the rest of my life, and if you knew him personally, if you were a family member or a friend, I just can't even imagine what that must have been like. As senseless and as unnecessary as it gets. That's the thing that really bothers me about the Owen thing more than anything. It didn't have to happen. It wasn't as if he was in the middle of a match and it was a botched move, he broke his neck or something like that. This did not have to happen. I talked extensively about this when I covered his Dark Side of the Ring episode, which you can find elsewhere. He was doing the Blue Blazer gimmick at the time, and he was scheduled to win the Intercontinental title from The Godfather on this show after making a bumbling superhero-like entrance from 80 feet up. The idea was that his harness would, as it's lowering him, when he's almost down on the mat, it would stop maybe 5 or 6 feet off the ground, and he would just kind of hang there for comedic effect, trying to unhook himself. Instead, there was some sort of malfunction. He plummeted to his death while the video package for his match was airing on the Titantron. Thankfully, we didn't see it happen live on the air, but people in the building did. He came very close to landing on referee Jimmy Corderas in the corner, and had that happened, we would have had 2 deaths instead of 1. Jim Ross, after being told in his ear by Kevin Dunn that he was going to have to give viewers the update on Owen, told Dunn, Kevin, I don't know what the update is. Nobody has told me anything. And Dunn told him, JR, Owen's dead. And then he started counting him down, 10, 9, 8, 7. And JR had to deliver the news to all of us moments after being told that Owen had passed away. Vince McMahon made the decision to continue the show and not tell the live crowd what had happened. Undertaker beat Steve Austin in the main event to win the WWE title, but honestly, who cares? Nothing else even matters on this show.